Good morning, and thank you for inviting us to present the keynote talk at this Congress. We will discuss Karoo research and its challenges and opportunities. We would like to mention at this point our affiliation to the Goerritz Cluster Biosphere Reserve, the National Research Foundation, and particularly the Arid Lands Node of SAON, to Renew Karoo Nursery, and to Wolvekral Conservation and Research Organization. What I'll cover in this talk is what we already know about Karoo rangelands, how land use changes expand our need for research, the challenges posed by complexity and aridity, priorities for research, and opportunities currently available. So, Karoo ecosystems and what we know was very much in the past focused on understanding the effects of grazing, particularly by domestic livestock, on Karoo rangeland composition and productivity, and the effects of grazing on also the fauna of the area. Vegetation maps were drawn up over the last 2 decades. We now understand that the Karoo comprises both the non-succulent Nama Karoo and the highly succulent Karoo, and that both these vegetation types can be subdivided into many other vegetation units. Differences in vegetation and in past land use have led to differences in the capacity of the land to carry herbivores, and so we also have carrying capacity maps. We understand that grazing can change vegetation, as you see along this fence line contrast with Tierberg exclosure on the one side, a farm moderately grazed by merinos on the other, and an overgrazed farm in this section here. Here is another example, this one near Nelspoort, showing grazing that led to increased abundance of a woody shrub and a more grassy vegetation under a different management. Drought can also change vegetation composition. Much of the Karoo has just been through a 6-year drought, and during this drought between 5 and 80% of many plant populations died. This leads to vegetation changes because it changes the relative abundance of palatable and unpalatable plants, and there is potential for droughts to change vegetation to the better. But obviously this will take time, and in the beginning there's simply a loss of grazing capacity. Invasive plants change indigenous vegetation, mainly because they form tall thickets that shade out grasses and dwarf shrubs. This changes the grazing, usually reducing grazing capacity, and unfortunately simply waiting or using grazing animals to attempt to change the situation does very little. One needs to clear the vegetation in order to bring back indigenous plants. Various models have been drawn up for the way we conceptualize vegetation changes in the Karoo. So the classic range succession model envisages that rain, resting from grazing, and successional processes generally lead to an improvement in rangeland condition, whereas heavy grazing, droughts, and disturbances might lead to poorer vegetation quality and more pioneer plants. However, there is controversy about this model. It doesn't seem to apply to the Karoo very well, and it has also been proposed that the Karoo rangelands are non-equilibrium systems where the effects of drought and heavy rain may override the effects of grazing management and lead to changes in both animal numbers and vegetation, that in fact the rangeland never really reaches equilibrium as it's always recovering from one or other. State and transition models are kind of hybrids of the former two models. They envisage that, for example, rainfall, timing, and quantity can lead to changes from grass to shrub and from shrub to grass, and that these changes are also influenced by a season of grazing. Over time, however, grazing can drive the vegetation to a condition dominated by highly unpalatable shrubs or even remove all vegetation. These systems are or states of vegetation are not readily reversible. They're a kind of alternate stable state, and vegetation may remain as unpalatable and shrub dominated for a very long time. However, it is possible with restoration, unusual rainfall events, and perhaps the intervention of droughts, for vegetation to return to a type of equilibrium system, once again shifting between various quantities of shrubs and grass. We also know a little, too little, about the role of animals in Karoo ecosystem processes. For example, how they control pests, pollinate plants, disperse seeds, and engineer the ground by digging it up, making places for seedlings to establish. And of course, they're totally responsible for nutrient cycling. We understand that grazing, as well as other forms of disturbance, can bring about great changes in Karoo ecosystem by reducing vegetation cover, changing vegetation composition, altering the fauna such as the pollinators, the seed dispersers, the consumers and the recyclers in the rangelands, changing the soil crusts, causing accelerated erosion, and leading to a loss of productivity and biodiversity in the land. But new land uses are now taking place. And this means we need to expand our research focus away from simply the effects of drought and grazing to incorporate a range of other disturbances. These would include, for example, radio astronomy areas where telescopes are set up, areas are cleared for the telescopes, and domestic animals are entirely removed from the scene. Solar installations where large areas are covered with solar panels. The introduction of game animals, for example, which are novel to the area. The introduction and development of wind farms. Both the wind and the solar installations require thousands of kilometers of cabling to transmit electricity, and these pose particular problems to birds. So these new arrivals in the Karoo mean that we need to ask new questions. We need to understand the effects of clearing of land, of changing local distribution of sun and water. We need to understand how novel animals will affect the ecosystem. Then there's land restitution. Land is changing hands. Land is being broken up into relatively small farms, and often these farms are under-resourced and they are run by novel farmers, inexperienced farmers. At the moment, extension support is very poor. Moreover, the land allocated for new farmers is often in relatively less productive, dry, and sometimes degraded areas. And these areas, often in the winter rainfall parts of the Karoo, in Namaqualand, for example, and in the southern Karoo, are vulnerable to climate change and become even drier in the absence of winter rainfall. They are becoming hotter and more difficult to farm. Moreover, this land restitution is happening during a period of general agricultural decline and economic stress, when markets for wool are decreasing, when it's more difficult to export products, and when costs of farming, because of labor costs and costs of resources such as food for supplementing animals during drought, are increasing all the time. There's also a rapidly increasing conversion of livestock farms to game ranches. And as you can see in the picture to the left, the types of animals being brought into the area are those species that never occurred here originally. They're being brought in both for tourism and for hunting. And although some research has been done on the effects of extralimital species on rangelands, it's not very well studied. And there's then lifestyle farming, where people want to live in remote and scenically attractive areas, but they also want to see as much of the scenery as they can and perhaps introduce more tourism as part of their income. And so they often make roads up hills that should never be damaged by roads, possibly leading to erosion. In fact, the effects of lifestyle farming in terms of species introductions, road making, different types of fencing, removal of domestic livestock and their replacement with either no livestock or other types of wildlife are really not well known. Lifestyle farms and game ranches are to some extent where the city comes to play. So some species are introduced, both plants and animals. Supplementary feeds are used to support such animals. Extremely impermeable fences, often with electrical wires, are installed to keep expensive game where they were introduced. And there are more and more roads that are accessible as 4x4 trails. Upmarket guest farms are often landscaped and planted with plants that don't belong in the area. There's potential for example, genetic isolation of animals shut in by fences. It's uncertain what the social effect of lifestyle and game farms are. For example, will it result in more job losses or in more job gains? Is this an opportunity for the recovery of wild plant and animal populations, or is it going to lead to more problems for these populations? What are the extension and education opportunities associated with game and lifestyle farms, and what type of extension services do such farms? The establishment of the square kilometre array over a large area in the central Karoo has resulted in the exclusion and removal of livestock, the acceptance of predators, and quite intense disturbances in small patches where the radio telescopes are erected. There are also far fewer people moving around in this landscape, and there's a change in the way that income's generated in this part of the central Karoo, in that farming has decreased and the products of farming, such as meat and wool, have decreased, probably affecting surrounding small towns. This development proposes many opportunities for research. For example, understanding how plant populations, how vegetation composition, how faunal communities change in response to livestock exclusion. There are also opportunities to look at restoration interventions and how geohydrology is changing with a decrease in groundwater extraction. The high-intensity disturbance around the satellite dishes at the SKA poses considerable challenges for restoration because of the aridity of the area, as you can see. Protected areas in the Karoo are also being extended and increased. South African National Parks is increasing its coverage and also attempting to subsidize conservation by increasing tourist numbers. And to do this, it needs to increase facilities such as accommodation and the types of accommodation. It needs to install new roads, water points based on borehole water or underground water. It has to offer competitive tourism facilities such as swimming pools, upmarket chalets. And so some of the questions being asked then are, what are the effects of exclusion of domestic livestock but introduction of higher densities of game contained by fences? And how long will the groundwater last? Is this a sustainable use of groundwater? Solar installations greatly change rainfall distribution and light distribution in the areas where they're set up. As you can see in this photograph, the soil underneath a solar array is shaded for most of the day and often bare of vegetation because of that, quite apart from the disturbance effect of setting up the panels themselves. A lot of the rain that falls in solar setups runs down the panels and accumulates on the downside of the panel. So vegetation receives perhaps double the rainfall immediately on one side of the panel, but aridity on the other shaded side of the panel. So we have, in effect, a rain addition experiment and a rain out experiment combined with a shading and disturbance experiment. What is the long-term effect of this on vegetation? We really have no idea, but what it would appear to do is to make the area less suitable for karoo plants and more suitable for a number of weedy plants, both crop weeds and rangeland weeds such as datura. Lactuca or wild lettuce, xanthium or boertebos, and even cannabis. So how should we manage weeds under solar arrays? Would it be best to plant crop plants, or should one graze? Although I don't think sheep would eat weeds such as these. There needs to be some investigation of whether spraying regularly with herbicides leads to permanent damage to these environments, and some research on the consequences of solar panels for carbon sequestration. Wind generators, large turbines, are usually placed at high points in the landscape. So to construct these, cranes have to be taken and new roads built up hills and up ridges. Large holes have to be excavated for the steel foundations to support the turbines, and many areas are cleared as laydown areas. This is considerable damage, and one has to remember that in 25 years' time, these structures will be decommissioned. One wonders whether the bonds placed at present will be enough to cover restoration costs in future. Many of our energy infrastructures have to be linked up with transmission lines, and these are often on bare ground so as to reduce fire hazards. When they are decommissioned, there will be huge restoration challenges as well. Ways have to be found to reduce bird and bat kill on these transmission lines. The poles supporting the lines are also roost places for birds, which in turn bring in invasive alien plants such as the prickly pear you see here. One of the possible futures for many areas of the Karoo is increased mining. At present, gypsum is mined in Namaqualand, titanium and diamonds on the coast, iron in the northern part of the northern province, and uranium and methane have potential for being mined throughout the Karoo. Uranium mining leaves behind radioactivity and often a lot of mess. Gas mining, on the other hand, has far greater implications for polluting groundwater, loss of groundwater, reduced groundwater levels, the danger of spills and surface storage of groundwater. And of course, roads will have to be developed to move gas and chemicals and sand between gas mines and their destinations or sources. Restoration following any kind of mining in the arid zone under very low rainfall conditions is always a massive challenge. However, not only does restoration require putting back of vegetation, it also needs to deal with water pollution, slimes dams, pollution of surface water, and pollution of groundwater, as well as permanent control of dust from exposed, polluted, bare soils. A number of restoration trials have been carried out on private land and in nature reserves and national parks, as well as on mine sites over the last 2 or 3 decades. However, there are lots of challenges related to restoration in an arid area simply because the timing and quantity of rainfall is unpredictable. So, whereas one can develop micro-catchments to catch water, to use water to the optimum, one doesn't know how long it will take to rain or how hard the rain will be, whether rain will obliterate these micro-catchments during floods, whether there will be follow-up rain should germination occur. There's much discussion as to whether these micro-catchments should be large and catch a lot of water, or smaller and catch a little water. Will a lot of water drown the seedlings? Will a little water evaporate too rapidly? Should one add mulch or should one not? What is the best season to carry these things out? Should one bring in seeds from other areas or only collect seeds locally? How will pelleting of seeds help? Should hydrogels be added to the site? Many, many questions around restoration. And yet it has potential to generate livelihoods for many people. Then there's the issue around urban sprawl. So as Karoo villages grow, and they are likely to grow as mining develops in the Karoo, tourism develops, and solar infrastructure or wind infrastructure develops, so the villages will grow. And with the villages come often poverty, domestic pets, plastics, polluted water, polluted air, and plastic pollution. We really have no idea of what effects these have on our wildlife, on our groundwater, on our rangelands, on the ability of our rangelands to sustain life and to carry out the improvement of pollutants, the destruction of pollutants. Are we going to bring the Karoo to a point of pollution where ecosystem services can no longer remove pollutants and the Karoo becomes like part of the city? This recent map of climate change shows that the Karoo area will probably experience stronger warming than other parts of the country. This is the position of the square kilometre array, and this is the position of Prince Albert, and I will discuss climate weather trends in Prince Albert in the next slide. In Prince Albert, We have been keeping weather records for quite a long time, and although there are breaks in our records, nevertheless, you can see that the numbers of days with maximum temperatures for some part of the day exceeding 40 have increased rapidly since 2015, whereas the number of days with below zero temperatures have in general decreased. And in fact, in 2019, we had no days below zero temperatures. We also have had far fewer snows on the mountains. Rainfall alone does not really explain the intensity of droughts. The Standard Precipitation and Evaporation Index, which takes into account temperature changes and increases in temperature that increase evaporation, is probably a better depiction of the severity of drought. These weather data for the SKA area from 1950 to 2020 show that the current drought is the most severe ever experienced, not simply because of low rainfall, but because of the combination of low rainfall and higher temperatures. It has also meant that dams have dried out very rapidly, water for drinking and irrigation has been in short supply, and that has resulted in the installation of many more boreholes and a reduction in groundwater, both through groundwater extraction and through increased evaporation. Warming has a direct effect on plants as well. Experiments carried out in the Knersverlakte on succulents show that warming by 2 to 4 degrees kills high proportions of succulent populations. For compact globose-shaped succulent plants, this was up to 90% of the population, and for taller, shrubbier succulents with narrow leaves, this was around 64% of the population. These warming experiments were achieved simply by reducing wind speed using transparent boxes. Experimental warming in the Nama Karoo reduced soil water from February to June. This surprisingly increased the growth of C3 shrubs, but had no effect on C4 grasses. Where the flora is dominated by annual plants, as is the case in overgrazed winter rainfall parts of Namaqualand, warming reduces the lifespan of annuals, and therefore grazing is depleted earlier in the winter. So, what are the challenges now for researchers in the Karoo? And I think that these are mainly increasing complexity and increasing aridity. Over time, the activities of people, including kraling, heavy grazing, crop production, faunal decimation by hunting, removal of predators, roads, fencing, fragmentation, mining, settlements, pest control, constructions of various types, pollution, combined with global change, have led to many, many changes in the vegetation and its productivity. And these will be ongoing. It might be possible to control or reduce the negative effects with restoration, but maybe it will not be. As range scientists, we think about felt productivity, and felt composition. However, this is partly controlled by the animals in the environment, whether they be termites or herbivores, and that in turn is controlled by weather patterns and soil stability, which affects vegetation, and moisture depending on rainfall. Everything that we do in management is determined by population sizes and national considerations and social considerations, whether we decide to mine, install more houses, renewable energy facilities, whether we use livestock or game, or protected areas, or remove all herbivores from an area, whether we extract the ground and surface water, and to what extent the climate is changing, how the rainfall, hail, wind, and fires affect the vegetation, all have effect on our local piece of felt. And the research we do has to bear in mind not only local effects, but effects that are global. So our economy and our vegetation sits within a global framework where challenges also come from the outside. Global warming, global economies, and global social changes, such as the digital era, all affect the way we do our research and what happens to the vegetation that we're researching. So, macroecology and macro systems ecology takes into account many, many complexities in the modern world and tries to predict and model what our vegetation and grazing capacity will do given many external inputs. Apart from the challenge of daunting complexity, the Karoo's aridity offers its own kinds of challenges. Because of low rainfall, there is low productivity, slow decay, slow nutrient cycling, slow growth of plants, and slow recovery after rainfall or restoration. This means that one needs to plan research for the long term and budget adequately. Moreover, the benefits of removing grazing animals or carrying out other forms of restoration may be slow to show. So, what should be our priorities for research in the Karoo? Well, leading on from the changes and developments that I've discussed in this talk, I think that macro systems research is important. We need to integrate data across time scales, spatial scales, and across disciplines to stop having a silo attitude towards research, because we'll never develop a big overall picture and understand where we're going without looking at various aspects of how people are affecting the environment and how best to solve the problems caused by developments. Then, next, restoration is extremely important to our future in the Karoo. Unless we restore soils, plants, animals, and ecosystem services as fast as we're destroying them, there is little hope for human habitation in this arid and harsh region. We need long-term monitoring of how plants and animal populations and communities are responding to climate change. There's a need for novel approaches in extension, how to get the message across about sustainable land use to emerging farmers, game farmers, and lifestyle farmers, all very different audiences, but all affecting Karoo rangelands. Then we need long-term monitoring of ground and surface water quality and quantity changes. Carbon sequestration data for Karoo soils and vegetation is very poor. We need to understand how much carbon is stored where, by what mechanism, and for how long. There's a need for development of new ways of handling solid and liquid waste in Karoo villages. More research is needed on this topic if Karoo villages are not to spoil their surroundings with the way they dispose their wastes. And on this topic, there's a need for research on sustainable settlements, how best people can be compatible with their surroundings and how to use resources sustainably. At a local scale, we need studies of vegetation management under certain developments, for example, solar infrastructures. There are many more research needs, but these I see as some of our priorities. So, what opportunities are all the changes taking place in the Karoo offering for researchers interested in mapping, monitoring, modeling, and solving problems that will make living in the Karoo a possibility in the future? Well, the changes in land use and climate are ready made experiments, as are the large scale disturbances in many of the new energy infrastructures and mines. There are also large archives of data being held by SAN, EZECO, CSIR, South African Weather Service that can be tapped and used as background baseline data for new research. Technology such as remote imagery and flux towers and other methods of remote data capture make it possible to get large quantities of complex data. And you can work far from a university using internet connections now available. There's also the exciting challenge of exploring interdisciplinary approaches to measuring change and solving problems through interaction either in person or remotely. Some organizations such as SAON, FTON, Sandparks, the SKA, Department of Agriculture will doubtless be offering job opportunities to those interested in carrying out research related to long-term monitoring and measuring of changes in rangelands, in the environment, in the economy, and the way that we make a living in the Karoo. Private industry will certainly need to employ researchers, whether it be in the mining industry, tourism industry, and there's a great and growing field of research required for restoration of land and water. I mentioned that SAON offers new opportunities for researchers, and one of these sets of opportunities would be at the Square Kilometre Array. The research here is managed by the Arid Lands Node based in Kimberley and has a particular interest in the responses of Karoo systems to land use and land cover change, for example, the withdrawal of livestock from the SKA area, the response of the soil and fauna to this land use change, possible research onto the reintroduction of animals and ecological restoration or alien clearing projects in the area, the effects of alien species such as prosopis on groundwater and their removal on recovery of groundwater, responses of plants and animals and soils to climate change, and of course hydrological responses as well to land use. FTON offers a whole different range of possibilities because the expanded freshwater and terrestrial environmental observation network is really planning to carry out macrosystem research to understand the relationships between societies and ecosystems in a gradient from towns and cities away into the natural environment under a scenario of climate change. And they will be establishing a number of flux towers to measure atmospheric and weather patterns along this gradient. Sandparks, on the other hand, is interested in exploring the effects of climate change, whether it be heat, drought, floods, or hail or fire, both on its income source, the tourism industry, and on the fauna and flora. It's also interested in land use change and in the possible spread of diseases among wildlife as influenced by climate change and warming. It would like more understanding of how climate change is affecting the spread of alien plant and animal species, the effects on freshwater systems, and how, for example, resource use, such as the collection of medicinal plants or firewood in parks, might influence communities. And that is the conclusion of my talk. Here are some inspiring publications that I found interesting during preparation of this talk, particularly Van Vogen's Parks in a Changing World, Seymour's Horizon Scanning, Hoffman's Karoo Research Gaps, and Cross's Paradigm Shift to a Restorative Culture. Thank you.
Good day everyone, and welcome to this year's GSSA Congress. I'm Vernon Collins from the Sayon Arid Lands Node in Kimberley, and I'll be talking to you about Teeberg Long-Term Ecological Research Site. The site is situated 30 kilometers east of Prince Albert. The town sits on the foot of the Swartberg mountain pass on the northern side in the Karoo. It is a quaint little town full of beautiful buildings and friendly faces. The Karoo covers a vast portion of South Africa. It is characterized by the Karoid or dwarf shrublands. It is most notably in the arid environment, where we have less than 400 millimeters of annual rainfall, in some cases even less than 100. The Karoo can be split up in the succulent Karoo and the Nama Karoo. Many common species occur throughout, particularly Pensias drosanthimus, as well as others such as Chrysocomas, Felicia, and Teronia. It is here in the Karoo that we find Teeberg LTER. The 100-hectare enclosure, first established as the Teeberg Karoo Research Center, was the start of many research projects, many of which are still ongoing. In 2014, the land was donated to the NRF and is managed by the Sayon Arid Lands Node. Our team frequently conducts fieldwork and maintenance at the site. We have a weather station that collects climate data, building a large database for Sayon, and it promotes all the other long-term ecological research happening at the site. We also have 2 huts available on site for researchers to stay when they visit here. Since the 1980s, many now renowned scientists have visited the site and often conducted their own research. It is worth going through the book just for the history and nostalgia of the legends that have been here before us. Some of the research started many years ago and is still ongoing, contributing to the long-term ecological research of the site. One of these studies include the exclosure plots. As mentioned before, we actively work to maintain and improve the infrastructure at the site. With the help of the Renew Karoo and the interns, we keep the place neat and tidy for visitors. During a recent visit to the site while conducting maintenance, we were fortunate enough to donate old materials to the local community center, who gladly accepted these materials and were able to use them for some of their own personal projects. As it is a research site, there have been numerous studies conducted, covering various fields illustrating the importance of this research gem. On the left, we can see some of the long-term studies conducted by Sayon at the site, including the exclosures, fire burn trials, fertilizer addition trials, and decomposition. On the right, we have a histogram illustrating some of the various fields that have been researched at the site, not just by Sayon, but overall. Many students and interns have also had the opportunity to work and study here and in turn produce ecological research. 2 noteworthy mentions is Gina Arena and Juan Swanepoel, who recently submitted and finished their PhD doctorate. One of Sayon's greatest assets here is the automated weather stations, which were established many years ago. These continue to collect climate data used for many of the other studies. The one station on the right is stationed at Wolverkrol, while the left one is at Tilburg. Both of these are useful for studies on site, but also in correlation to each other. As with much of the Karoo, the area has been experiencing an extended drought, which is having a clear effect on the vegetation. This effect is measured in the active drought studies, particularly the drought transects, which has recently been resurveyed, and also noted in the phenological work done at the site. It has to be said that SAON's success at the site is in great part due to Sue and Richard's involvement. They have been conducting research here long before SAON got on board and continue to produce world-class research. They also provide support to SAON interns and students by providing great insights. Future development of research opportunities at Tilburg Long-Term Ecological Research Site and Wolverkrol Nature Reserve will be facilitated by the Expanded Freshwater and Terrestrial Environmental Observation Network, or FTON, which has approved the Garden Route Gateway landscape. This landscape stretches from the coast, England, into the Karoo and covers an area from Robertson in the west to the Gamtus River in the east. The landscape is centered around the NMU George campus with satellite sites at Prince Albert. This includes Tilburg and Wolverkrol Nature Reserve, Duivenhoeksweer, Baviaanskloof and the Krom. What makes this effort unique is the fact that it will not only cover an extensive area, but a very heterogeneous landscape which includes various biomes and vegetation types. FTON aims to provide and operate a network of 6 heavily instrumented landscape-level research platforms across South Africa. These pictures illustrate 2 of the flux towers that have been established just outside of Kimberley. This initiative from FTON will aim to include patterns and processes from land to catchment to sea. SAON and FTON would both like to encourage researchers and students to develop or get involved in ongoing research studies at the site. If you are interested in research conducted at the site or looking to collaborate on existing datasets, please feel free to contact me. The huts are also available for researchers, and we would like to encourage anyone to make use of them. You can also contact me for these purposes. I would like to thank Sue and Richard for all their support over the years, as well as Renew Karoo's interns, and also those that contributed to this talk by providing photos or slides from previous talks, and then for you for indulging me and listening to my talk. Thank you.
Hello GSSA 56 delegates and invited speakers and keynotes. It's a great privilege to share the results of our latest special issue in the African Journal of Range and Forest Science. The special issue came out in February, March this year after a year-long process last year, and the theme of the special issue is montane rangelands in a changing world. And really this presentation is a tribute to all the contributions to the special issue, and up front a very, very big thank you to all the authors who contributed papers and trusted us with the special issue. And up front I want to say a very big thank you to my co-guest editors Karen Kunkel and Tim O'Connor, and to the associate guest editors Tebi Jewett, Ntebo Singh Sekeli and Kevin Kirkman. It really was a wonderful project and we are very proud of the product. So a little bit of an introduction. Montane rangelands hosts a significant proportion of the world's rangelands, and montane grasslands have seen particular evolutions of cultures, natural resource governance systems, indigenous knowledge systems, livelihoods, food security adaptations, and even spirituality. And one of the main characteristics of montane rangelands is elevational migration between summer pastures and winter lowlands, which is typically called transhumance, and that is something that we see a lot of in southern Africa as well, particularly in the Maluti-Drakensberg, where we have summer alpine pastures intensively used, and then livestock are moved to warmer, lower altitudes in winter. Montane grasslands are considered one of the areas of, or three main areas of pastoralism globally. In fact, mountains have seen key domestication events, including sheep, goats, South American camelids, the yak, and the taurine line of cattle. So they have played a very, very important role in human domestication of animals over thousands of years. If we look at the African context of montane pastoralism or montane rangelands, pastoralism in general has been practiced since about 9,000 years before present, but montane pastoralism is limited compared to other continents. We don't have the same extent of high elevation or mountainous area compared to other continents. In fact, we have lost a substantial amount of montane rangeland due to climate change in the Saharan area, where between 7,000 and 5,000 years ago, a lot of the high elevation rangeland was lost to deserts through extensive climate change. So currently we have three main areas of montane rangeland in Africa. We have the Southern African Great Escarpment and associated uplands, which include the Highveld and the B Plateau, and the Mashonaland Plateau, and so on. We have the Ethiopian Highlands, and then we have the Atlas Mountain System. Because African montane rangeland is not a very big component of the continent, it hasn't been well featured in previous special issues on pastoralism. The last one was in the 1980s in the journal Mountain Research and Development. But because Africa is our second driest continent, and because mountains are our primary water towers, there's a very strong intersection between montane rangeland and water production. And so this is a very important topic for Africa, given how much water comes from our mountains and the increasing pressure on our montane rangelands. So looking at what came out of the special issue, firstly, just to say we had 12 research paper contributions, we had one book review contribution, and then we had the guest editorial. Of the 12 papers that were submitted, the original papers, they were spread between the Drakensberg, the Atlas Mountains, and the Macqualand Escarpments in South Africa, with most of them being in the Maluti-Drakensberg, 2 in the Atlas Mountain, and then 1 in the Macqualand Escarpment paper. We had 40 authors contributing from 5 different countries at least, and that's a very nice contribution to the special issue. Of those who focused on the Maluti-Drakensberg, we have 1 from the Free State, 5 from KwaZulu-Natal, 3 from the Lesotho Highlands, and we have none from the Eastern Cape. This is a pity because the Eastern Cape actually remains the least well represented section of Maluti-Drakensberg in the literature. So we really want to encourage mobilizing of more publications from that area, particularly because there is extensive rangeland practitioner experience and rangeland intervention experience happening in those regions. Interesting or very significant to say is that the book review on Rodney Moffat's bibliography of the Drakensberg was very well received and certainly a landmark publication for the Maluti-Drakensberg, and we are very proud that it was featured in the special issue as part of that output. If we look at the thematic spread of contributions to the special issue, we see that we have fire, communal grazing, global change, communal rangeland degradation, wetland policy, and shrub encroachment as themes, discrete themes. However, we can easily combine these into 2 dominant themes in the special issue. The most dominant was communal rangeland systems at 58% of the contributions, and then fire management was 42%. What is also very interesting is that 5 of the papers, or almost 42% of the contributions, used long-term data sets, and we're very grateful to the authors for trusting the special issue with their long-term data sets. These are not trivial data sets. Most are 30 to 40 years long, and that's very, very valuable information that has been shared. So the key outcomes from the special is that for the protected likely grazed portions of the Maluti-Drakensberg and KwaZulu-Natal, in other words, Ukhuhlamba-Drakensberg Park, appropriate fire management, in other words, every 2 years in the dormant or the spring season, is critical to maintaining desired vegetation for best ecosystem service benefits and best biodiversity conservation. And inappropriate fire management can be detrimental to local Proteorepeliae savannas. Also, the entire mesic grassland system may be vulnerable to global warming and increased aridity, and this is something that will need to be continually monitored and kept track of. And just to say that all of these studies were done at the Brotherton trials area at the Cathedral Peak site, which is managed by SAON, and it was really a big privilege to get such a number of studies from that site in the special issue. So thank you to the authors for that. For the communal areas in the Maluti-Drakensberg, there were 2 types of outcomes, one positive, one negative. The positive one was that well-managed communal rangeland can support in situ biodiversity conservation outside protected areas. And this is a very important message, that if communal rangeland is well governed and well managed, it can be a very, very valuable form of conservation that doesn't require formal proclamation of additional protected areas and additional state burden in terms of management. So that's a very positive message to take home. However, the picture in reality is a little bit more depressing. Poorly governed communal rangeland is the biggest driver of degradation rather than climate change, at least in the Maluti-Drakensberg. And this degradation includes mass shrub encroachments, as well as major wetland compromise and erosion of those ecosystem services. So there's a great challenge here to our communal rangeland governance systems or governance responses, those responsible for its governance, to consider alternative forms of governance to boost the positive benefits of well-managed communal rangeland. In the Atlas Mountains, from which there were 2 papers, there's a need for seasonal grazing in favor of continuous grazing in order to maintain species diversity, and unfortunately there's a general decline in species diversity and rangeland resilience due to overgrazing. And so there's hope for a positive message of governance of rangelands. Communal rangelands can change, but at the moment the trend is not looking positive. So the special issues comes out with a number of conclusions. There's a major need for more non-natural science, and the one paper from the Macqualand really was the only non-biophysical paper in the special issue, which was a great pity. So there's a great need for more non-natural science topics, including the social and political aspects of rangeland history and rangeland governance. There's a need to develop interdisciplinary research for montane rangelands. There's a very high value in long-term monitoring, regardless of the type of governance or the topic in question. So long-term monitoring of montane rangelands should be encouraged. There's also a need to tease out climate change impact versus land management or other impacts, and not all changes should be assumed to be driven by climate change, as is the default trend in a lot of global change science today. So a few closing remarks. academic interest in mountain pastoralism has been slow to develop compared to research in pastoralism and rangelands in general, so this is a bit of a lag topic. And we hope that the special issue has provided an interesting array of contributions and also encourages work towards filling in gaps in terms of a more holistic understanding, particularly in terms of the disciplines that are not well represented. In other words, balancing out the dominance by the biophysical disciplines. So there's great scope for future disciplinary, interdisciplinary, and transdisciplinary work in African montane rangelands. And we hope that this special issue creates a bit of a impetus or springboard towards that, particularly under the global change banner, but also the immediate human pressure challenge on montane rangelands. As Briley have said in 2018, that modern pastoralism is not only sustainable, but beneficial for the management of the world's dryland environments. This is true for montane rangelands in Africa, but it would be subject to better rangeland governance, particularly in communal rangeland systems. So a very big thank you again to the authors for their contributions, as well as for their photos. All of the photos in this presentation are ones that have been provided by the authors of the papers. A big thank you to Franny du Toit, who kept us on our toes and made sure we kept to the deadlines and made sure everything ran smoothly. So thank you, Franny. A massive thank you to Peter Swanepoel for just encouraging this special issue. For me, this was the first time I've been guest editor of a special issue, and it was a deep but exciting learning experience, and Peter was very encouraging. A big thanks to the various anonymous reviewers who made sure that quality was good and that we filtered the best papers for the journal and filtered out those that would not be suitable. A big thank you as well to the Grassland Society Council for their permission to run the special issue with this topic, and then once again to my co-guest editors and specifically to the associate guest editors who did all the hard labor with managing the individual manuscripts. Thank you very much. Oh, and finally, sorry, just to say that you can access the full special issue here, and I'm not sure if it's still available for free online, but please try the link and see if you can access it. Thank you.